Tonight I start with a confession. We have a double parsha. It's called Tazria-Metzorah. And I never really liked these portions. And it's a confession because I'm a rabbi. I'm supposed to like every single piece of the Torah. But, year after year, I would sort of skim over the details, contamination, leprosy, all kinds of rituals to restore someone to purity, impurity, bodily fluids. Like, what was all this? And it was just like all the details felt a little bit boring and irrelevant. And it took me a while to really get it. And a few years ago, even before the pandemic, which sort of, shed a new light on the wisdom of these rituals and quarantine and contamination, I got what was profound here, or at least one profound thing. I know other profound things will emerge over the years. It takes me a while to catch on. And I wanted to share with you one piece of this parsha to share with you, the powerful wisdom embedded here. So there's a man who has leprosy, and it's hard to understand what leprosy Metzora is. Tikfor Freimer-Kensky, may her memory be a blessing, a well-known Bible scholar, teaches that it's a state of death, of extreme decomposition. It's not a state that anyone wants to be in. So the priest says over a man who has leprosy, he says, Ish saruahu. He is a man afflicted with sarat. He is a leper, so to speak. Tamehu, he is impure. And then it says again, the Kohen, the priest, shall surely pronounce him unclean. His lesion is on his head. So the Kohen describes him, or the priest describes him as unclean. That's who he is, that's what he is. And then even worse, what happens is that the leper himself walks around and he's supposed to say, right, he's supposed to proclaim about his very self, Tameh, 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 Tameh. Could you imagine walking around saying, impure, impure, I'm unclean, unclean? Like, you can only imagine how he felt. What a cruel thing, right? How horrible is that? But the thing about this parsha, or these parshiot, these portions, is that there's no state that is permanent. They're all temporary. The parsha is all about being restored to purity, going from uncleanness, right, being tameh, to cleanness or impurity, to purity, to being in a state of being tahor. There's an anthropologist, Mary Douglas, a 20th century anthropologist who really writes books about Leviticus that are eye-opening. And she compares the rituals in Leviticus, particularly in this parsha, to secular society. She says, when we label people in this society, right, let's say a criminal, and that criminal tries to get out of prison and become integrated in society again, it's so hard for them because we really don't have any rituals that restore someone to their previous state of purity. And the same with spending a time, she says, in a psychiatric facility. That person is stigmatized as mentally ill for the rest of their lives. And I was thinking about labels and how we label one another. I've had some painful experiences about this in my own family. I have children with disabilities and a son with autism. And the difference between someone treating my son as if he's autistic, or a person is like, there's an abyss between those two ways of being. Right? How do you approach someone? Do you approach someone as their label? Is that all they are? Or do you see that there's a full person even beyond that label, beyond that disability, beyond their illness? My son lost his capacity to speak at 6.5. That for me was a tremendous loss. And yet, I understand him and know him intimately as a full person. And when I spend time with him, I hear from him, I understand from him and hear from him things that are beyond autism, and disability, or different. And what I hear from him is the full spectrum of human emotion. and states of being. I hear from him hunger, hunger, angry, angry, frustration, frustration. And at times when he looks deep into my eyes, I hear the words soul, soul, or love, love when he gives me a hug. And that, knowing that I get the full range of my son is comforting to me, even without, that the fullness of language and expression. This past week, I had an encounter with a neighbor, which relates to this issue, and it was really powerful for me. I'm going to call her Shlomit, even though she wouldn't know what that word means, and she's not Jewish. It means wholeness, and she taught me a lesson about wholeness. She's a young woman. She's about 25. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor 2 years ago, and we all thought she would make it. And recently she was told, and I was told about her, that she had 2 months to live. This woman is very dear to me. She's open and questioning and direct and loving. And I went to see her with some vegetable matzo ball soup in my hand, and I hadn't seen her in several months. I saw someone who was greatly diminished and very ill. And even though I didn't want to, because I didn't want to inflict my pain on her, I started to cry. And she looked me in the eyes and she said, I love you. And then she said, everything is love. So while I was seeing and feeling loss, loss, death, death, sick, sick, she was saying to me, love, love. And I will never forget that. My friend, my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Sharon Cohn-Annisfeld, writes, we are all of us more than one thing. We are not our physical appearances, our gender, our sexuality. We are not only our profession or the roles that we fill. We are not only our religion, our ethnicity, our race, our culture. We are not only our poverty or our wealth. We are not only our disability or our illness. The lesson was brought home to me, she says, a few years ago when our son was seriously ill. I feared that his illness was all people would see when they saw him. I am forever indebted to those individuals who could see that he was more than his illness and so helped him to see and remember that as well. When we confuse part of a person's identity or experience for the totality of who they are, we diminish the fullness of their humanity. This essential act of dehumanization is at the heart of so many forms of prejudice and most systems of oppression. It is also rooted in a kind of idolatry. So here she makes the theological connection. And she cites 2 Jewish scholars, Moshe Halbertal and Avishai Margalit, write in their book Idolatry, that one classical form of idolatry is the worship of an aspect of the divine, the separation of a part from its unity, and the worship of that separated part. It is similarly idolatrous, she says, to take one aspect of a human being created in the divine image and mistake it for the whole. When we flatten ourselves or each other in this way, we diminish our humanity and we diminish the one in whose image we are made. So according to her, everything's at stake here, right? We're actually, in a sense, when we take one part of a person's experience or one part of who they are and make it the whole, it's a kind of idolatry. Right? It's a kind of desecration of human relationship. I think what we do when we label each other is we effectively quarantine them by our labels. We're so scared of being like them, right? That we send them apart. We send them outside the camp, so to speak, of human society or outside the community by giving them labels. I know that all this vulnerability is hard to take. I know that when we see each other and we see someone who's about to die or see someone who's sick, it's very hard not to put a gulf between ourselves and the other. But let's try when we see someone else to understand that they're just like us and that their vulnerability is reminding us of ours, or their struggles are reminding us of ours, or they're sort of about to die is reminding us that we're mortal. So when you encounter someone and you just hear the words sick, sick, or pain, pain, or vulnerability, vulnerability, and you feel your own fear, fear, and maybe your insides are screaming, keep away, keep away. Remember that you are them and they are you. Remember, me too, and love, love. Or in the words of my young neighbor, Shlomit, everything is love. I'm surrounded by love. The world is calling to us, each of us, with these words. Kadosh, kadosh, holy, holy. Tahor, tahor, pure, pure. The world is calling to each of us by name. Love, love. It invites us to respond with the same words. Love, love. Shabbat shalom.